On Christmas morning, a perfect mansion hid an emptiness that no one could have imagined. Among expensive toys and a suffocating silence, a small child was left completely alone. What seemed like simple abandonment would soon reveal something much darker behind that closed door. If this story has grabbed your attention, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. And now, on with the story. The city of Greenwich, Connecticut was buzzing, even on December 25th. The streets of the exclusive suburb displayed homes decorated with lights that blinked in synchronized rhythm, perfect wreaths on mahogany doors, and Christmas trees visible through expansive windows. It was the kind of scene that promised happiness wrapped in gold foil, the picture-perfect Christmas everyone desires, and few truly experience. But there's a truth that the tree-lined streets and high walls hide very well. Behind every flawless facade lies a story no one can imagine. The Anderson mansion was the most imposing on the block. 3 stories of contemporary architecture, mirrored glass, a garden with built-in lighting, and an entrance that looked more like the lobby of a 5-star hotel. Everything there breathed success, power, control. Richard Anderson was 42 years old and had a reputation that preceded any introduction. As the owner of one of the country's largest real estate development firms, he was the man who erected entire buildings in record time, negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts as casually as someone, ordering a coffee, and transformed abandoned lots into luxury developments. In business magazines, he was called a visionary. At charity dinners, a philanthropist. In real life, he was a man who spent more time in meetings than at home. And on that Christmas morning, he was exactly where he always was, far away. His daughter Emily was only 2, light brown hair in loose curls, big, curious eyes, rosy cheeks, and a smile that would melt any less occupied heart. She woke up early, like all children on Christmas Day, but there was no one waiting for her with a warm hug or a cheerful good morning. The nanny, Jessica Davis, was in the kitchen with her phone in hand, typing messages with a restrained fury that made her fingers tremble. She was 20, with a slender frame, her hair in a messy bun, and dark circles under her eyes that betrayed sleepless nights. She wasn't a bad woman. She was just a woman too tired to keep pretending everything was okay. Jessica came from the Bronx and took a train and a bus to get to that house every day. She woke up at 5 in the morning, got back at 9 at night, and on weekends, when she was supposed to rest, she still had to care for her own mother, who suffered from high blood pressure and diabetes. Her boyfriend, Kevin, was constantly demanding attention, saying she was more of a nanny to other people's kids than his girlfriend. And her mom, Marlene, always needed medicine, doctor's appointments, money for rent. Jessica felt like she was being pulled in a dozen different directions at once, and none of them were her own. That Christmas, she had asked for the day off. She had given 2 weeks' notice. She had said it was important, that it was the only day of the year her whole family got together at her aunt's house in Queens, that her mother was counting on her. But Richard, with that polite yet firm tone that left no room for disagreement, had said it was impossible. He had a last-minute commitment, a strategic meeting with foreign investors that couldn't be rescheduled, and Emily couldn't be left alone. He offered to double her pay for the day. Jessica accepted because she had to, but inside something began to crack, and that morning the crack became a chasm. Kevin had sent a series of aggressive texts saying she always chose her boss, that he was tired of being the second option, that if she didn't show up at his family's party, it was over. Her mother called, crying, saying she was feeling sick, that she needed company, that she didn't understand why her daughter preferred taking care of strangers to taking care of her. And Jessica, standing there in that white marble kitchen with high-end imported appliances she could never afford, felt a revolt rise in her throat like acid. She looked at Emily, who was dragging a teddy bear across the living room and babbling random words, and thought, this little girl has everything and I have nothing. And here I am, on Christmas, giving up my life for hers. That's when she decided. It wasn't a rational decision. It was an impulse, an internal explosion she had held in for too long. Jessica grabbed her purse and started shoving things inside in a hurry. Her wallet, charger, an old lipstick, a pack of cookies she had saved for an afternoon snack. Emily toddled over to her with short, unsteady steps, holding the teddy bear in one hand and extending the other, as if asking to be picked up. Jessica looked away. She couldn't look the little girl in the eyes. If she did, she might not be able to leave. But she left. Before walking out the door, she turned to Emily and said, her voice choked with a mix of anger and despair, "You'll be fine here with your expensive toys and your beautiful house. I'm not your mother. I'm not obligated to be here on Christmas while my family is waiting for me. Let your dad take care of you since he makes so much money." Emily didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone, and she started to cry. Jessica closed the door and locked it from the outside, as she always did when she left. She heard the little girl's cries from the other side and quickened her pace as if fleeing from something chasing her. She walked down the street with her purse on her shoulder and her phone buzzing non-stop. Texts from Kevin saying she'd made the right choice, that he was proud of her for setting boundaries. Texts from her mum saying she was already waiting, that she had made her favorite cornbread stuffing. Jessica should have felt free, relieved, victorious. But all she felt was a heavy emptiness, as if she had left something important behind and couldn't go back to get it. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Emily kept crying. She called out for Jess, which was the sweet way she pronounced the nanny's name, and wandered through the house with her teddy bear dragging on the floor. The Christmas tree was lit, presents were piled underneath. The table was set with a red tablecloth and white flower arrangements. Everything was perfectly decorated, coldly beautiful, frighteningly empty. Emily tried to reach the doorknob a few times, but her little arms were too short. Then she tried to climb onto the sofa, slipped, fell on her bottom, and cried even louder. She didn't understand where everyone had gone. She didn't understand why she was alone. She only understood that something was wrong, and it was at that exact moment that Richard decided to come home. He was on his way to the meeting when he got a call from his partner informing him that the investors had cancelled at the last minute. A problem with their flight, something about fog at JFK Airport. Richard hung up, looked out the car window and felt a strange pang in his chest. It wasn't quite relief. It was almost like guilt, or maybe a premonition. He thought of Emily, thought about how he had left the house without a proper hug, thought about how his daughter had reached her little arms out to him as he passed through the living room, and he had said, with that automatic haste, that he'd be back soon. He decided then to do something he rarely did, improvise. He told the driver to turn back. He would spend a few hours with his daughter, take some pictures, post them on social media, show that he was a present father too. Maybe even take her to see the Christmas lights on Fifth Avenue. It would be a nice gesture, a gesture that, he would later realize, saved his daughter's life. The car pulled up in front of the mansion around 10:30 in the morning. Richard got out, adjusted his blazer, swiped his card at the electronic gate, and went inside. The house was too quiet. He frowned. Normally, when he arrived, he would hear Jessica's voice talking to Emily, or the sound of the TV on a children's channel, or the clatter of pans in the kitchen. But at that moment, there was only silence, and in the distance, a muffled cry. Richard dropped his briefcase in the foyer and walked toward the living room. What he saw made his heart pound. Emily was on the floor near the coffee table, her face red and wet from crying so much. Around her were objects that should never have been within a child's reach. A toppled crystal vase, a remote control with the battery cover off, a glass cup that luckily hadn't broken. The little girl turned her head upon hearing her father's footsteps, and the look she gave him was one of pure desperation and relief mixed together. She cried out, "Daddy!" in a high-pitched voice, and crawled across the floor until she reached his legs, grabbing his pants with both little hands as if she feared he would leave again. Richard quickly knelt, scooped his daughter into his arms, and held her tight against his chest. He felt her heart beating fast, her ragged sobs, her little body warm from crying. He looked around, searching for Jessica, and called her name. Nothing. He walked to the kitchen, to the nanny's room, to the bathroom. Empty. Everything was empty. He returned to the living room, still holding Emily, and that's when he realized what had really happened. Jessica's purse wasn't on the coat rack. Her jacket wasn't hanging up. The spare key that was kept in the kitchen drawer was gone. Jessica had left, and she had left Emily alone. Richard felt something he hadn't felt in years: fear. Not the calculated fear of losing a deal or facing a lawsuit. This was a primal, visceral fear, the fear of a father who suddenly understands he could have lost his child. He imagined everything that could have happened. Emily could have swallowed something, could have gotten hurt, could have tried to leave the house and gotten lost. And he wasn't there. As always, he wasn't there. He grabbed his phone and dialed Jessica's number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same thing. He sent a flurry of texts on WhatsApp, one after another, first polite, then demanding, then desperate. The messages were delivered but not read. Richard started pacing through the house, trying to understand what had gone wrong, how he had gotten to this point. Emily clung to him, her little face hidden in his neck, and each of her sobs was like a stab to his conscience. That's when his phone vibrated. A message from Jessica. Richard opened it so quickly he almost dropped the phone, but what he read made his blood run cold. "Mr. Anderson, I can't take it anymore. I told you I needed the day off. You wouldn't listen. I have a family too. I have a life too. Emily isn't my responsibility. She's yours. And if you want to do something against me, you should know I have proof. Proof of everything that happens in this house. So you'd better just let it go." Richard read the message 3 times, trying to process it. Proof. Proof of what? He had never done anything wrong. He always paid on time, always treated Jessica with respect, always offered bonuses, days off, even helped with money for her mother's medicine. What the hell was she talking about? And why was she so confident? Who had put these ideas in her head? He looked at Emily, who had finally stopped crying and was now attached to him like a frightened koala. He looked at the house with all its perfect decorations that suddenly seemed fake, cold, a set designed to hide the emptiness. He looked at his phone, at that threatening message that made no sense. And for the first time in years, Richard Anderson didn't know what to do. He walked to his office, still holding his daughter, and opened his laptop. He accessed the home's security camera system. There were cameras at the entrance, in the living room, in the kitchen, in the garden. He had never bothered to check the recordings before. Why would he? Everything always ran perfectly. But now, with that message echoing in his mind, he needed to understand what was happening. He rewound the footage to that morning. He saw Jessica in the kitchen, nervous, fidgeting with her phone. He saw Emily approaching her. He saw the moment Jessica grabbed her purse, looked at the little girl, and left. And then, a few minutes later, he saw something he didn't expect. A second person, a quick shadow passing through the side garden, someone who shouldn't have been there. Richard zoomed in, tried to get a better look, but the image quality wasn't good enough. Who was that person? What were they doing there? And more importantly, did Jessica know someone was in the house when she left? Richard's heart pounded again, but now it wasn't just fear. It was anger, suspicion, and a determination as cold as steel. He wasn't going to let this go. He was going to find out what was happening, who was involved, and why. Because if there was one thing Richard knew how to do, it was investigate, piece things together and close in. That's how he ran his business. And now that's how he was going to protect his daughter. He picked up the phone and dialed Maria, the housekeeper who had worked at the house for 5 years. Maria had gone to visit family in New Haven, but she had always been the most trustworthy person he knew. She answered on the second ring, and Richard explained the situation in a controlled voice, omitting only the part about the shadow on the cameras. Maria was silent for a few seconds, and then said something that made Richard take note of everything. "Mr. Anderson, there's something I should have told you before. Jessica has been acting very strange these past few weeks, getting weird calls, getting nervous, closing her bedroom door when she answered. And one time I heard her talking to someone, talking about Ms. Catherine. At the time I thought it was nothing, but now I'm thinking it wasn't." Catherine. The name hit him like a bomb. Catherine Miller was Richard's executive assistant, the woman who solved all his problems, who organized his schedule, screened his calls, closed deals. She was efficient, discreet, indispensable, but she was also the person who had insisted, with great emphasis, that he not cancel that day's meeting, even knowing it was Christmas. She had said the investors were waiting, that it was a unique opportunity, that it couldn't be postponed. And now, Richard realized, she knew the meeting was going to be cancelled. She knew before he did. Richard thanked Maria and hung up. He sat in his office chair, with Emily asleep in his lap, and stared at the laptop screen, where the frozen image showed that shadow in the garden. He didn't know who it was yet, he didn't know what was being planned, but he knew that on that Christmas, something much bigger than he imagined was at stake, and that his absence had opened a door that should never have been opened. Emily stirred in her sleep, sighed deeply, and clutched her little hand to her father's chest. Richard kissed her forehead and made a silent promise. He would find out the truth, no matter what it cost, no matter who was involved. Because for the first time in his life, Richard understood that there are things money can't buy, and true protection is one of them. Richard didn't sleep that Christmas night. Emily finally fell asleep around 11, exhausted from crying, but he stayed awake, sitting in the armchair next to his daughter's crib, just watching. He watched her breathe, her chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm that contrasted with the storm raging inside him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the scene from that morning, the little girl alone, the dangerous objects scattered around, that shadow on the cameras, and Jessica's message with its tone of veiled threat that he couldn't get out of his head. Proof. She had said she had proof. But proof of what? Richard was a man accustomed to dealing with problems, a financial crisis. He hired the best consultants, a labor lawsuit. He had a top-tier legal team, unfair competition. He devised strategies that left his adversaries with no way out. But this was different. It was personal, intimate, painful. It involved his daughter, her safety, the trust he had placed in people he thought he knew. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized he didn't really know anyone. He knew employees. He knew service providers. He knew people who smiled when he entered a room. But really know them? Know what was going on in their heads, what they felt, what they were planning? No, he had never had time for that. As the sun began to rise, a shy orange behind the thick bedroom curtains, Richard picked up his phone and started making calls. The first was to Maria, who promised to return from New Haven that same day, cancelling her plans with her family. She was a trustworthy woman in her 50s, a widow with no children, who treated Emily like a granddaughter. If there was anyone who truly cared about that child, it was Maria. The second call was to Leo, the security guard who worked at the community gate and also did some shifts at the house. Leo answered with a sleepy voice, still on his day off, but when Richard explained that he needed to talk urgently, he said he would be there in an hour. The third call Richard hesitated to make. Catherine Miller's number blinked on his phone screen. Catherine, the efficient assistant, the woman who always had the right answers, who anticipated problems before they happened, who knew Richard's routine better than he did himself. She had worked for him. For 3 years, was 35, had an MBA from Wharton, spoke fluent English and Spanish, and had an impeccable resume. She was also beautiful, elegant, always well-dressed, always with that discreet jasmine perfume that left a trail through the office hallways. Richard had never thought of her in an inappropriate way. She was a colleague, period. But now, with what Maria had said, he began to wonder if it wasn't precisely that blind trust, that had opened the door for something he couldn't yet name. He put his phone away without calling Catherine. First, he needed to better understand what was happening. He needed more information, more pieces of the puzzle. He got up slowly, careful not to wake Emily, and walked to his office. The house was silent, that heavy silence of a place that has just been through a trauma and hasn't yet recovered. He turned on the laptop again and went back to the camera recordings. This time he went further back. He checked the last 15 days, looking for patterns, for anything out of the ordinary. And he found it. In the last 10 days, Catherine had been to the house 3 times. That in itself wasn't strange. She sometimes brought documents that needed an urgent signature or picked up files Richard had forgotten at the office. But what caught his attention was the timing. Always in the late afternoon, always when Richard wasn't there, and always staying for at least half an hour. Richard zoomed in on the images. He saw Catherine entering, greeting Jessica at the door, and coming inside. And then the living room camera showed the two of them talking. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language was clear. Jessica seemed nervous, gesturing a lot, and Catherine was there, with that calm, almost motherly posture, as if she were advising, calming her down. Richard felt a knot in his stomach. Why was Catherine advising his daughter's nanny? About what? And why had he never known about these visits? He kept watching. In one of the recordings, dated 5 days ago, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Catherine handed an envelope to Jessica, a thin white envelope, which the nanny opened right there and then quickly put in her purse, looking around as if she feared being seen. Money, was it money? Why was Catherine giving Jessica money? Richard leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Something bigger was happening here, something he couldn't yet see completely. But the pieces were starting to fit together, and the picture that was forming was disturbing. Catherine wasn't just helping Jessica. Catherine was manipulating Jessica, perhaps encouraging her dissatisfaction, fueling her resentments, creating a conflict situation. But why? What did Catherine gain from this? What did she want? Just then, the doorbell rang. Richard jumped, glanced at the clock. 7:30 in the morning. It was too early for visitors. He walked to the intercom, looked at the external camera, and saw Leo, the security guard, already at the door, wearing a Yankees cap and a serious expression. Richard opened the gate, waited for the man to enter, and met him in the living room. Leo was a 40-year-old man, with dark skin, a strong body from working out religiously, and a direct way of speaking that Richard had always appreciated. No beating around the bush, no flattery, just the raw truth. Richard offered him coffee, Leo accepted, and the two sat at the kitchen table. "Mr. Anderson, when you called I got worried," Leo began, stirring his coffee. "It's not like you to call me like this outside of my hours. What happened?" Richard told him everything. The cancelled meeting, the unexpected return home, Emily alone, Jessica missing, the threatening message. He only omitted the part about Catherine and the envelopes, because he wasn't sure of anything yet and didn't want to accuse anyone without concrete proof. Leo listened in silence, his face growing more serious, and when Richard finished, he muttered a curse under his breath and shook his head. "This is serious, Mr. Anderson. Very serious. Abandoning a child like that, especially on Christmas. Jessica always seemed a bit lost to me, but I never thought she'd go this far." "Did you notice anything strange with her in the last few weeks?" Richard asked, leaning forward. "Any different behavior? Any strange people hanging around?" Leo stroked his beard, thoughtful. "Now that you mention it, yes. There was one day, about 2 weeks ago, I saw her arguing with a guy on the sidewalk. I was at the gate, doing my rounds, and I saw them going at it. He was angry, gesturing a lot, and she was crying. I figured it was her boyfriend, couple stuff. I didn't get involved. But the guy looked like bad news, tattoo on his arm, chain around his neck, that kind of, well, Would you recognize him if you saw him again?" "I think so. He was tall, thin, shaved on the sides, had a lion tattoo on his forearm, a really flashy one." Richard made a mental note. Another piece. Maybe this was the boyfriend Jessica had mentioned in casual conversation, Kevin. Maybe he was pressuring her, creating a stressful environment that contributed to her breakdown. Or maybe it was something else. Maybe he was part of a bigger plan. "Leo, I need you to do something for me," Richard said, his voice low but firm. "I need you to look into this guy, discreetly. Find out who he is, where he lives, what he does. And I also need you to keep an eye out for any strangers who show up around here or in the community. Something is going on, and I need to find out what." Leo nodded. "You got it, Mr. Anderson. I'll see what I can find. And what about Jessica? Are you going to file a police report?" Richard hesitated. Part of him wanted to, yes, go to a police station and report everything, make Jessica pay for what she did. But the other part, the strategic part that ran his business, knew that acting hastily could scare off whoever was behind this and make the clues disappear. If there was a conspiracy, he needed to let the conspirators believe they were safe, that he suspected nothing. Only then could he uncover the whole truth. Not yet, he replied. "First, I want to understand what's happening. Then I'll take the appropriate measures." Leo left shortly after, promising to come back, with information by the end of the day. Richard went upstairs to check on Emily, who was still sleeping soundly, and found Maria arriving. She had driven all night from New Haven to Greenwich, had dark circles under her eyes and wrinkled clothes, but she entered the house with that maternal energy only she possessed. She hugged Richard, told him everything would be okay, that she would take care of Emily as she always had, and that he could count on her for anything. "Maria, you said you heard Jessica talking about Catherine." Richard began, pouring the housekeeper a glass of water. "Can you remember exactly what she said?" Maria sat on a kitchen stool, took off her shoes and sighed. "It was about 4 days ago, Mr. Anderson. I was mopping the living room, and Jessica was in her room with the door slightly ajar. She was on the phone, and I heard her say something like, 'Catherine said I have rights, that I don't have to put up with everything, that I can ask for more.' I thought it was strange at the time, because Catherine has nothing to do with the internal affairs of the house, but I figured maybe they'd met somewhere, that they were friends. But now, with everything you've told me, I'm thinking it wasn't friendship. It was something else." "Influence," Richard murmured. Catherine was influencing Jessica, putting ideas in her head. "But why?" Maria asked, genuinely confused. "What would Miss Catherine gain from that?" That was the question Richard couldn't answer. Catherine had an excellent salary, generous bonuses, profit sharing. She didn't need money. She didn't seem to have any animosity toward him. On the contrary, she had always been loyal, dedicated, almost obsequious. So what did she want? Power? Revenge? Or was it something even more complicated, something involving other people, other interests? Just then, Richard's phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. He opened it, and what he read made his heart pound. "Mr. Anderson, if you're thinking of hurting me, you'd better think again. I have audio, I have photos, I have proof of things you wouldn't want to get out. Leave me alone, and I'll leave you alone. But if you push it, you'll regret it." It was Jessica. It had to be. Richard showed the message to Maria, who widened her eyes and covered her mouth with her hand. "My God, Mr. Anderson, is she blackmailing you?" "She is," he replied, his voice controlled, but with a cold anger pulsing beneath it. "And I'm going to find out what this proof is, because, Maria, I've never done anything wrong. Never. I've always treated all my employees with respect, always paid on time, always been fair. If she has something, it was planted. It was fabricated." Maria nodded, but Richard saw the doubt in her eyes. And he understood. He understood that in the age of social media, of instant judgments, it didn't matter if the proof was real or not. It only mattered if it was convincing. An edited photo, a clipped audio file, a well-crafted narrative, and a lifetime's reputation could crumble in a matter of hours. And if Catherine was involved, if she was really orchestrating this, then she had access to privileged information, to private moments, to details that could be twisted in devastating ways. Richard typed a short reply. "Let's talk in person. Meet me today at 3 p.m. in Central Park near the lake. Come alone." He sent it. The message was delivered but not read. Richard waited. The minutes, dragging like hours. 15 minutes later, the reply came, "Okay." Richard looked at Maria. "I need you to stay with Emily today. Don't let anyone in. No one. Not acquaintances, not employees, no one. And if Catherine shows up, don't let her in, and call me immediately," Maria promised, with the seriousness of someone who understands the gravity of the situation. Richard went upstairs, took a quick shower, changed his clothes, putting on something casual, jeans, a t-shirt, sneakers. He wanted to seem approachable, not intimidating. He needed Jessica to feel comfortable enough to talk, to confess, to reveal what was happening. And if she wouldn't talk willingly, he had other means. He had contacts, he had influence, he had resources. But he preferred dialogue. He always had. At 2:30, he left the house, took his own car, a discreet black sedan, and drove to Central Park. It was a Saturday, the day after Christmas, and the park was full of families enjoying the afternoon sun. Children running, couples holding hands, seniors walking. The normal life of normal people, Richard thought, with a pang of envy. He parked, walked to the lake, found an empty bench and sat down. It was 2:50. Jessica arrived promptly at 3. She looked different. Hair down, sunglasses too big for her face, an old backpack on her shoulders. She seemed smaller, more fragile, but there was also something defiant in the way she walked up to him and sat on the bench next to him, maintaining a calculated distance. "Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice trembling but trying to sound firm. "Jessica," he replied, turning to face her. "Why did you do it? Why did you abandon my daughter?" She took off her sunglasses, and Richard saw that her eyes were swollen and red. She had been crying a lot. "I couldn't take it anymore, Mr. Anderson. I told you I needed the day off. You wouldn't listen. I have a family, a life, problems, and you only think about your daughter. You never thought about me. You were being paid to take care of her, Jessica. It was your job." "And I did!" she exploded, her voice rising. A few people turned to look, and she lowered her tone again. "I took care of her for 2 years. I cared for her like she was my own. But no one took care of me. No one asked if I was okay, if I needed help, if I had problems. And when I asked for one simple thing, a Christmas with my family, you said no." Richard took a deep breath. Part of him knew she was right. He had been selfish, had put his own needs above hers, but that didn't justify abandonment. "You could have told me sooner, Jessica. You could have talked to me, explained, but you just left, leaving a 2-year-old child alone in a house. Do you have any idea what could have happened?" Tears started streaming down her face. I know, and I regret it. But at that moment I just wanted to leave. I was tired, angry, and someone told me I was right, that I deserved more, that you wouldn't do anything if I left. They said I had power, that I had proof." "Who said that?" Richard asked, leaning forward. "Who put these ideas in your head?" Jessica hesitated. She glanced around, as if afraid of being overheard. Then she looked back at Richard, and in her eyes there was fear, but also something like relief, as if she could finally unburden herself. "If you were in Jessica's shoes, would you have told the truth or stayed silent to protect yourself? Let us know in the comments." "It was Ms. Catherine," she whispered. "She came to visit me several times, always when you weren't here. She said I was being exploited, that I deserved better working conditions, that you only cared about your business and forgot about people. She gave me money, said it was so I could support myself if I decided to quit. And she taught me how to record conversations, to take pictures of things that could be misinterpreted. She said that if you ever tried to hurt me, I'd have a way to defend myself." Richard felt the world spin. Catherine, his trusted assistant, the woman he thought he knew, was behind everything. But why? What did she gain from it? "Jessica, do you know why Catherine did this? Did she explain it to you? Did she have a reason?" Jessica shook her head. "I don't know. She just said she was helping me because she cared. But sometimes I thought she wanted something else. Like she would ask questions about you, about your routine, about who visited the house, about documents. I answered because I thought she was a friend, that she trusted me. But now I see she was probably just using me." Richard closed his eyes. It was all fitting together. Catherine didn't want to destroy Jessica. She wanted to destroy him. And she was using Jessica as a tool, a disposable piece in a much larger game. But what was the end goal? To blackmail him, to take over the company. It had to be something like that, something related to power, money, control. And if that was the case, then Catherine wasn't acting alone. There had to be more people involved, people with aligned interests, people who would benefit from his downfall. He opened his eyes and looked at Jessica. "Do you have these recordings? These photos?" She nodded, taking her phone out of her backpack. "I do, it's all here. Show me." Jessica opened a folder on her phone, and Richard saw dozens of files, audio, photos, videos. He took the device, started to review them. They were common scenes from daily life, but edited, cut in a way to seem suspicious. Richard talking to Emily on his lap while on His phone cut to make it look like he was neglecting his daughter. Richard arguing on the phone, cut to make it seem like he was fighting with someone in the house. Audio of conversations cut in half, taking them out of context, creating false narratives. It was a perfect trap, and if that leaked, even if it was fake, it would be devastating. "Jessica, I need this phone," Richard said, his voice calm but authoritative. "I need this proof to defend myself, and you need to help me, because if Catherine is using you, she'll discard you as soon as she doesn't need you anymore. You'll be the one to blame for everything while she walks away scot-free." Jessica looked at him, her eyes still wet, and Richard saw the indecision there. She was scared. Scared of Catherine, scared of the consequences, scared of losing everything. But she also felt guilty. Guilty for abandoning Emily, guilty for letting herself be manipulated, guilty for being there, on that bench, with an uncertain future. "If I help you," she asked, her voice weak, "will you forgive me? Will you give me another chance?" Richard thought. Part of him wanted to say no, wanted to make Jessica pay for what she did. But the strategic part knew he needed her. He needed someone on the inside, someone who could confirm suspicions, provide information, help dismantle whatever Catherine was planning. "I'll give you a chance," he said, "but you'll have to prove you deserve it. You'll have to help me find out what Catherine is planning. And you'll have to testify, if necessary." Jessica nodded, handing him the phone. "I'll help, I promise." Richard took the device, put it in his pocket and stood up. "Go home. Don't tell anyone we talked. And if Catherine contacts you, you let me know immediately." He walked back to his car, Jessica's phone weighing in his pocket like a ticking bomb. He got in, started the engine, but didn't move. He just sat there, hands on the wheel, his mind working. Catherine. How had he been so blind? How had he not seen the signs? And what else was she hiding? Because if she had manipulated Jessica, if she had created false evidence, if she had such intimate access to his life, then she could have done much more. She could have tampered with contracts, with documents, with confidential information. She could have sold secrets, sabotaged deals, conspired with competitors. Richard picked up his own phone and called the company's lawyer, Dr. Howard Klein, a 60-year-old man, experienced and naturally suspicious. He explained the situation in general terms without going into detail and requested a complete investigation into Catherine Miller. Professional history, financial records, criminal background, everything. Dr. Klein listened in silence and promised results in 48 hours. When Richard finally got home, it was already dark. Maria was in the kitchen, making dinner, and Emily was playing in the living room, smiling when she saw her father. Richard picked his daughter up, hugged her tightly, and for the first time in days felt something like hope. He was going to find out the truth. He was going to protect his daughter, and he was going to get justice, no matter what it cost. The 48 hours Dr. Howard Klein had promised felt like an eternity. Richard tried to maintain a normal routine, go to the office, handle pending tasks, take calls, but his mind was elsewhere. It was on Jessica's phone, which he had hidden in a safe at home. It was on the camera recordings, which he reviewed every night after Emily was asleep. It was on Catherine, who continued to work beside him as if nothing had happened, with that professional smile and infuriating efficiency. On Monday morning, 2 days after Christmas, Catherine walked into Richard's office with a folder of documents and a perfectly made coffee, just as she always did. She wore a light grey suit, her hair in a flawless bun, discreet makeup, jasmine perfume. The picture of competence, of loyalty, of someone you could trust with your eyes closed. Richard accepted the coffee, thanked her, and watched as she explained the day's appointments, the scheduled meetings, the calls that needed to be returned. He nodded, asked pertinent questions, kept his mask on. But inside, he studied her every gesture, every word, every pause. He looked for signs of nervousness, of guilt, of anything that would confirm what Jessica had said, and he found nothing. Catherine was calm, controlled, perfect. Either she was innocent, or she was an exceptional actress. Richard was betting on the latter. When she left the office, he picked up his phone and sent a text to Leo, the security guard. "Any news on Jessica's boyfriend?" The reply came quickly. "Yes, his name is Kevin Henry Smith, 23, works as a delivery driver for an app, has a record for public fighting and possession of an illegal substance, but nothing serious. Lives in the Bronx with his mom. I'm watching him, but nothing unusual so far." Richard thanked him and put the phone away. Kevin seemed to be just a young man with a troubled history, maybe pressuring Jessica, but probably not directly involved in the conspiracy, unless he was also being used. Unless Catherine had gotten to him, offered him money, promises, something to make him cooperate. Richard made a mental note. He also needed to investigate the relationship between Catherine and Kevin, if there was one. The desk phone rang. It was the receptionist, announcing that Dr. Howard Klein was in the lobby. Richard asked for him to be sent up immediately. While he waited, he organized some papers on his desk, more to calm his nerves than out of necessity. The lawyer entered minutes later, a thick folder under his arm, his expression serious and a little tired. "Richard," he greeted, shaking the businessman's hand firmly. "I brought what you asked for, and I have to say I don't like what I found one bit." They sat down and Dr. Klein opened the folder on the desk. Inside were documents, screenshots, reports. Catherine Miller had an impeccable professional history, it was true. But there were gaps, inconsistencies. She had worked for 3 companies before joining Richard's firm, and she had left all 3 under murky circumstances. None of them had sued, none had made public statements, but Dr. Klein had spoken off the record with her former colleagues, and the stories were similar. Catherine was efficient, indispensable, but also manipulative, opportunistic, always, looking for the next opportunity. At one company, she had been informally accused of leaking confidential information to competitors. At another, of creating drama among employees to eliminate rivals. But the most worrying thing, Dr. Klein continued, pointing to a specific document, is this. In the last 6 months, Catherine has made frequent deposits into a bank account that isn't hers. It's a joint account, shared with a one Mark Fisher. Richard frowned. "Who is Mark Fisher?" "One of your main competitors," Dr. Klein replied with a look that said it all. "Owner of Fisher Construction, the same one who's been trying to win bids that have always been yours, who offers lower prices, who somehow always seems to know exactly what you're going to bid before you announce it." The silence that followed was heavy. Richard felt the blood freeze in his veins. Catherine was passing information to a competitor. She was sabotaging his company from the inside, feeding the enemy with privileged data, and probably getting paid very well for it. And all this while smiling at him, organizing his schedule, feigning loyalty. "How much did she get?" Richard asked, his voice controlled but tense. "Hard to say, for sure, but from the deposits I was able to trace, it's in the range of $300,000 over the last 6 months. And that's just what left a paper trail. It could be much more." Richard leaned back in his chair, took a deep breath. $300,000, more than she earned in a year working for him, and it was probably just the tip of the iceberg. If she was passing on strategic information, contracts, profit margins, Mark Fisher was saving millions, and Richard was losing deals without understanding why, thinking it was bad luck, bad timing, a tough market, when in reality it was betrayal. "And there's more," Dr. Klein continued, turning a page. "Mark Fisher is married to a woman named Laura Miller, Catherine's sister." Richard felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Sister. Catherine was passing information to her brother-in-law, to her own family. It wasn't just about money. It was personal. It was intimate. It was a family conspiracy to take him down, to take what was his, to destroy what he had built with so much effort. "Why did she do it?" Richard murmured, more to himself than to the lawyer. "Why did she agree to work for me if the plan was to destroy me?" "Because it's easier to destroy from the inside than from the outside," Dr. Klein replied, closing the folder. "Catherine joined your company with a clear objective, to gain your trust, get access to everything and then use it against you, and it worked. She was patient, she was competent, she was indispensable, until you couldn't imagine the company without her. And then, when you were completely dependent, she started to act. Richard shook his head in disbelief. It had been so obvious, and he hadn't seen it. He had let a snake into his own house, let it feed, gain his trust, and when he least expected it, it struck, not with venom, but with betrayal. "What do I do now?" he asked, looking at the lawyer. "Fire her, today, immediately, and sue her for breach of contract, leaking confidential information, everything you can. It'll be a long legal battle, but you have enough evidence to win." Richard agreed, but he knew that firing Catherine now would only be half the problem. She still had Jessica's recordings, still had potential traps set, and could still cause enormous damage if she felt cornered. He needed to be strategic, precise, surgical. He needed to disarm the bomb before cutting it loose. "Wait," he said, holding up his hand. "Let's not act yet. I want her to keep thinking she's safe. In the meantime, I'll gather more evidence, protect myself legally, and make sure that when I do act, she has no way to retaliate." Dr. Klein hesitated, but nodded. "Be careful, Richard. People like Catherine don't play games. If she finds out you know, she could do something drastic." "I know," Richard replied. "That's why I need to be smarter than she is." The lawyer left, and Richard remained alone in the office, looking out the window at the bustling city below, indifferent to the personal dramas of each individual. Cars, horns, people rushing, life happening. And there, on the 23rd floor, a man trying to understand how he had been so blind. He took out Jessica's phone, which he had brought hidden in his briefcase, and started reviewing the audio files again. This time, with more attention, looking for details he had missed the first time. And he found one. In an audio file, dated 3 weeks ago, Catherine was talking to Jessica in the mansion's kitchen. The quality wasn't great, there was background noise, but he could clearly hear what Catherine was saying. "Jessica, you need to understand that he doesn't care about you. He only cares about his daughter, his empire, his image. You're just another disposable piece, and when he gets tired of you, he'll replace you without a second thought. But you have power, you know things, you see things, and that can be used to your advantage." "But I don't want to hurt anyone," Jessica's voice replied nervously. "I just want to be treated with respect." "And you will be," Catherine assured her, with that smooth, convincing voice. "But only if you have something to protect you. That's why I'm helping you. Record everything, Jessica. Take pictures. Keep proof. Because if one day he wants to fire you, accuse you of something, hurt you, you'll have a way to defend yourself." Richard paused the audio. Catherine wasn't just manipulating Jessica. She was setting up a safety net, creating false evidence, building narratives that could be used in multiple ways. It wasn't just about destroying Richard. It was about having control, having power, having ammunition for any eventuality. And that was terrifying because it meant she thought of everything, foresaw scenarios, had plans within plans. The phone rang again. It was Leo. Richard answered. "Mr. Anderson, there's news, and it's important." "Go on." "I've been watching Kevin, Jessica's boyfriend, and I saw him meet with a woman this morning. The description matches Ms. Catherine's. They talked at a coffee shop in the Bronx, were there for half an hour, and then she handed him an envelope. I got pictures, sending them now." Richard opened the images that arrived on his phone. It was Catherine, no doubt, sitting at a corner table talking to Kevin, who was looking around nervously, and at the end, the envelope passing from hand to hand. More money, more manipulation. Catherine was paying Kevin to pressure Jessica, to create the stressful environment that led to her breakdown on Christmas. It was all planned, meticulously executed. "Leo, you're a genius," Richard said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Keep watching, and if she meets with anyone else, I want to know." He hung up and stared at the photos. Catherine wasn't just a traitor. She was a strategist, a professional-level manipulator. She had identified Richard's weak spot, his absence from home, his dependence on others to care for Emily, and she had attacked it. She had used Jessica as a weapon, created chaos, and was now likely planning her next move. Which could be blackmail, public exposure, who knows what, but Richard wasn't going to let her. He called Jessica. She answered on the third ring, her voice low and frightened. "Jessica, it's Richard. I need you to do something for me." What is it? Catherine is going to contact you soon, I'm sure of it. And when she does, you're going to act normal. You're going to pretend you're on her side. And you're going to record everything she says, everything she asks for, everything. Can you do that? There was a long pause. Then, Jessica replied, with a determination Richard hadn't expected, I can. She used me, didn't she? She just wanted to screw you over, and I was stupid enough to believe her. You weren't stupid, Jessica. You were manipulated. But now you can help fix this. You can help protect Emily and protect yourself too. I'll do it, you can count on me. Richard hung up, feeling for the first time in days that he had a real chance of winning this war. He had evidence, he had allies, he had a plan. Now it was just a matter of time, patience, and strategy. Exactly what he did best. That night, at home, after Emily was asleep, Richard sat with Maria in the living room and told her everything. The housekeeper listened in silence, her expression changing from surprise to indignation to sadness. When he finished, she shook her head in disbelief. Mr. Anderson, I never would have imagined Miss Catherine was capable of this. She always seemed so proper. I know, Richard murmured, looking at the glass of whiskey he had poured but hadn't touched. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who seem the most trustworthy. Maria stood up, went to him, and placed a hand on his shoulder in a motherly gesture. You're going to get through this, you're going to protect Emily, and you're going to get justice. I believe in you. Richard looked at her, this simple, honest woman who had more integrity in her little finger than Catherine had in her entire body, and smiled. Thank you, Maria, for everything, for being here, for taking care of my daughter, for being real. Always, Mr. Anderson, always. In the following days, the pieces continued to fall into place. Jessica called to say that Catherine had contacted her, setting up a meeting to discuss the next steps. Richard instructed her to go, to record everything, to do exactly as Catherine asked, but to always keep him informed. Leo continued to follow Kevin and found out the young man was receiving $1,000 a week from Catherine, always in cash in brown envelopes. Dr. Klein obtained documents proving that Mark Fisher had won 5 bids in the last 6 months, using information that only Richard should have had. And most importantly, hidden in the files of Catherine's work laptop, they found a document that was practically a manual on how to destroy Richard Anderson. Step by step, detailed, meticulous, from gaining his trust to sabotaging deals to creating personal scandals involving neglect of his daughter. Richard read that document with a mixture of horror and admiration. Catherine had planned everything, every detail, every move, and if he hadn't come home that day, if he hadn't found Emily alone, if he hadn't become suspicious, her plan might have worked perfectly. He would have lost custody of his daughter, lost contracts, lost his reputation, and Catherine and Mark would have taken everything. But he had found out, and now he was going to act. On Friday of that week, 1 week after Christmas, Richard called an extraordinary meeting at the company. The partners, the directors, the legal department, and Catherine were all present. She walked into the conference room with her usual confident smile, thinking it was just another routine meeting. She sat in her usual chair next to Richard, opened her laptop, and prepared her pen, ready to take notes, to solve problems, to do what she always did. Richard began the meeting by thanking everyone for their presence and stating that he had important matters to discuss. Then he looked directly at Catherine and said in a calm but authoritative voice, "Catherine, I have a few questions for you, and I suggest you answer them honestly." Her smile faltered. "Of course, Mr. Anderson. Ask away. Do you know Mark Fisher?" The silence that followed was absolute. Catherine turned pale, her eyes widened slightly, and for the first time since Richard had known her, she looked lost. He's married to my sister. So you do know him, and you have a joint bank account with him?" Catherine didn't answer. She looked around, saw the serious faces of her colleagues, of the legal department, and she understood. She had been caught. "Mr. Anderson, I can explain," she began, her voice trembling. "You don't have to," he interrupted, holding up his hand. "I already know everything. I know you passed confidential information to him. I know you manipulated employees. I know you created false evidence against me. I know everything. Catherine! She shot to her feet, knocking over her chair, her face red with anger and desperation. You can't prove anything. Oh, but I can, Richard replied, placing a folder on the table. I have bank statements, recordings, documents, witnesses. I have everything, and you are fired for cause. Furthermore, you will face criminal charges for corporate sabotage, leaking confidential information, and attempted extortion. Catherine looked at the folder, at Richard, at the others in the room, and understood that she had lost. She had underestimated her opponent, had trusted her own plan too much, had forgotten that Richard hadn't. Built an empire by being naive. She grabbed her purse, looked at him with pure hatred in her eyes, and said with venom in her voice, "You'll regret this." "No," Richard replied calmly. "You're the one who's going to regret this." Catherine stormed out, slamming the door, and Richard, for the first time in weeks, breathed a sigh of relief. The snake had been exposed. The threat had been neutralized. Now it was just a matter of fixing the damage, regaining trust and moving on. With his daughter safe, his company protected, and the certainty that in the end, the truth always wins. Always. The months following Catherine's dismissal were like waking up from a long, suffocating nightmare. Richard had managed to neutralize the threat, protect his company, and ensure that Catherine and Mark Fisher would be held legally accountable for their crimes. The lawsuits were underway, the evidence was solid, and Dr. Howard Klein was confident that justice would be served. But Richard knew that legal victories, however important, didn't heal emotional wounds. They didn't restore lost trust. They didn't repair the time he had wasted being the wrong kind of man. And that's when the real transformation began. One February morning, hot and sunny as only a northeastern summer can be, Richard woke up a different person. Emily had slept poorly, had nightmares, and around 4 in the morning she came to his room crying, asking to be held. Richard picked her up, brought her into his own bed, and lay there holding his daughter, feeling her little heart beat against his chest, listening to her breathing slowly calm down. And it was in that moment, with the early morning light starting to brighten the window, that he understood something fundamental. He had almost lost this. He had almost lost his daughter, not to death but to his own absence, to the neglect disguised as responsibility, to the work disguised as love, to the mistaken idea that providing was enough. When the sun had fully risen, Emily was still asleep in his arms, and Richard made a decision. He picked up his phone and sent a message to the office, saying he wouldn't be coming in that day, nor the next week, in fact. He was going on vacation. A real vacation, not one where his phone rang every 5 minutes and his laptop was always on. A vacation where he would be just a father, just present, just human. The reaction at the office was one of surprise. Richard Anderson taking a vacation, the man who was married to his work. But he offered no explanations. He simply delegated responsibilities, trusted the competent directors he had hired over the years, and turned off his corporate phone. He put it in a drawer and locked it, as a symbol. The old Richard was locked away. The new one was just beginning. The first few days were strange. He didn't know exactly what to do with. So much free time. He woke up early out of habit, looked at the clock and remembered he had no meeting, no call, nothing but being present. He had a slow breakfast with Emily on his lap, played with her in the garden, took her to see the ducks at the park. Simple, mundane things that once seemed like a waste of time and now seemed like the meaning of everything. Maria watched this transformation with a discreet, satisfied smile. She said nothing, but Richard knew she approved. He knew this was what she had always wanted to see. A.E., real father, not an absent provider. And gradually Emily began to change too. She became less fussy, more smiley, more secure. She started calling Daddy more often, looking for him when she woke up, running to hug him when he came home. And each of those hugs was like a brick rebuilding something that had been broken, but Richard knew there was still one piece missing from the story, a piece he needed to fix, even if it hurt. Jessica. He had promised to give her a chance, promised that if she helped he would forgive her. And she had helped. She had recorded the conversations with Catherine, provided crucial evidence, testified to everything necessary. But after that, Richard hadn't contacted her again. He had left her adrift, not knowing if she was forgiven, if she had a job, if she had a future. And that wasn't fair. One Tuesday afternoon, Richard called Jessica and asked her to come to the house. She arrived half an hour later, with the same nervous air as always, her hands trembling slightly, her gaze averted. They sat in the garden, away from prying ears, and Richard got straight to the point. "Jessica, I asked you here because I need to tell you a few things. First, thank you. You helped me uncover the truth, protect my daughter, and I couldn't have done it without you. So, thank you." She nodded but said nothing. She was still scared, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Second," Richard continued, "I want to apologize. I put you in an impossible situation. I exploited you without realizing it. I treated you like a machine and not a person. You were right when you said I only thought about my daughter and never about you. And that was wrong, very wrong." Tears began to roll down Jessica's face. She wiped them with the back of her hand, trying to maintain her composure, but it was difficult. "Are you firing me?" she asked, her voice choked. "No," Richard replied, and he saw the relief in her eyes. "But I'm also not going to force you to come back to work here. I know it must be hard, after everything that's happened, to come back to this house and pretend everything is normal. So I'm going to give you a choice. If you want to stay, you can, but better conditions, a fair salary, respected hours, guaranteed days off, all the rights you always deserved. And if you want to leave, you can do that too. I'll give you 6 months' salary as severance, an excellent letter of recommendation, and any help you need to start over. The choice is yours." Jessica was silent for a long moment, processing. Then she looked at Richard with an intensity he didn't expect. "Why are you doing this? I abandoned Emily. I deserve to be fired, sued, maybe even arrested. Why are you being so kind?" Richard smiled, a sad but genuine smile. "Because I've learned something in these last few weeks. I've learned that people aren't just good or bad, right or wrong. They're complicated, full of layers, motivations, pain. You made a mistake, it's true. But you made it because you were desperate, because you were manipulated, because no one supported you when you needed it. And I was part of that. So yes, you deserve a second chance, just like I do." Jessica wiped away another tear and took a deep breath. "I want to stay, but not as a nanny. I can't take care of a child anymore after what I did. I don't think I trust myself to, but maybe I could help in another way. In the kitchen, with cleaning, I don't know. I just want to be part of something honest, you know? No games, no lies." Richard nodded. "I'll talk to Maria. I'm sure she'll be happy to have you on the team. And Jessica, thank you for choosing the right side in the end. I know it was difficult." She stood up, wiped the garden dirt from her hands, and for the first time since Richard had known her, she smiled. A genuine, relieved, hopeful smile. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson, really." In the following months, life began to find a new rhythm. Jessica returned to work at the house, but now helping Maria with household chores, and their relationship became almost like that of a mother and daughter. Jessica enrolled in a nursing program, dreaming of a profession that made sense to her. Kevin, the problematic boyfriend, was let go after Jessica realized he was only with her for his own gain, and her mother, Marlene, received financial help from Richard for her medical treatments, which greatly eased the pressure on Jessica. As for Catherine and Mark, the legal proceedings continued. Catherine tried to negotiate, to bribe, to create more lies, but the evidence was irrefutable. She was ultimately ordered to return the illegally obtained funds, pay heavy fines, and was barred from holding positions of trust for 10 years. Mark lost several contracts after the investigation revealed that many had been won fraudulently, and his construction firm went into crisis. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. And Richard felt no pleasure in it, only relief that the truth had prevailed. But the biggest transformation happened within Richard's own home. He started coming home, from work earlier, participating in Emily's routines, reading bedtime stories, being present for the important moments. He hired a new assistant at the office, but this time with much more care, with rigorous background checks, and always maintaining a healthy professional distance. He learned to delegate, to trust his team, to understand that he didn't have to be involved in everything all the time for things to work. And Emily blossomed. She started talking more, learning new words every day, developing her own personality. She was smart, curious, affectionate, just as her mother had been before she passed, away too soon from complications during childbirth that no amount of money could prevent. Richard had tried to fill the void left by his wife with work, with success, with material achievements. But now he understood that the only way to honor her memory was to be the father his wife would have wanted him to be, present, loving, real. One Saturday afternoon, 6 months after that fateful Christmas, Richard was at the park with Emily. She was chasing pigeons, laughing when they flew away and running back to her father's arms to be tossed in the air. And as he lifted her, hearing her crystal-clear laughter, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Genuine peace. Not the artificial peace bought with achievements and status, but the peace of someone who is exactly where they should be, doing exactly what they should be doing. His phone rang. It was a message from Leo, who now worked as the head of security for the company full-time. Mr. Anderson, just heard that Catherine was seen moving out of state. Looks like she's going to try to start over in another city. Thought you'd want to know. Richard read the message and put his phone away without replying. He had nothing more to say about Catherine. She was the past, a turned page, a lesson learned. The future was right there, in his arms, laughing and asking for more. Always more. That night, after Emily fell asleep, Richard sat in his office with a glass of wine and a pen. He began to write a letter, not to send to anyone, but to himself. A letter of reflection, of promises, of commitments. He wrote about the man he had been and the man he wanted to be, about the mistakes he made and the lessons he learned, about the importance of being present, of trusting the right people, of protecting what truly matters, and he ended the letter with a simple but powerful sentence. True success isn't measured in achievements, but in connections, not in how much you build, but in how much you care. And I promise, to myself and to my daughter, that I will never forget that again. He folded the letter, put it in a drawer, and went upstairs. Emily had moved in her sleep and her little arm was outside the blanket. Richard went in quietly, tucked the blanket around her, kissed her small, warm forehead and whispered, "I love you, my sweet girl, and I'll be here. Always." And for the first time since becoming a father, Richard truly believed those words. Because they weren't just empty promises, they were real commitments built on the foundation of acknowledged mistakes and genuine transformation. They were proof that it's never too late to change, to grow, to become the best version of yourself. The story of Richard and Emily could have ended in tragedy that Christmas. It could have been just another statistic of parental neglect, of betrayed trust, of threatened innocence. But it ended in redemption. It ended in love. It ended with a father who learned to be a father, an employee who found a new path, and a child who, without understanding everything that had happened, felt in her heart that she was now safe, loved and protected. And if anyone were to ask Richard what the most important decision of his life was, he wouldn't say it was starting his company, or winning that multi-million-dollar contract, or building that iconic skyscraper. He would say it was the day he decided to come home early, the day he listened to the premonition in his chest and acted on it, the day he found his daughter alone and finally understood what truly mattered. Because in the end, it's not the buildings we leave behind that define who we were. It's the lives we touch, the hearts we care for, the moments we choose to be present. And Richard had learned that the hard way, but he had learned it. And he would spend the rest of his life making sure Emily never doubted her father's love, never felt alone, never came in second, never came place. Maria, observing this transformation from behind the scenes, used to tell her friends at her church group, "You know that saying, God works in mysterious ways." That's what happened to Mr. Anderson. He almost lost everything to learn what he truly had, and now he cherishes it like a treasure, because it is. And she was right. Because Emily was a treasure, Not for the expensive clothes or the big house or the imported toys, but for the purity of her love, the trust in her eyes, the way she threw herself into her father's arms without fear of falling, because she knew, even being so little, that this was a safe place, that her father would catch her, that her father was present. The years passed, as they always do, bringing new seasons, new challenges, new joys. Emily grew up, went to school, made friends, developed dreams. And Richard was there for all of it. For the first difficult word she learned to write, for the first school play, for the first fall off her bike, for the first questions about the world. He wasn't perfect, he still made mistakes, he still had hard days, but he was present. And that made all the difference, and whenever someone asked him what the secret to his success was, he would smile and reply, being present. That's it. Being truly present for the people you love. Because in the end, that's what remains. Not the money, not the awards, not the titles, but the memories, the hugs, the moments you chose to be there. One evening, many years after that whole story, Emily, now a 14-year-old teenager, asked her father, as they had dinner together, "Dad, do you remember that Christmas when I was a baby, the one you always say changed your life?" Richard smiled, put down his fork and looked at his daughter with all the love in the world. "I remember it like it was yesterday, sweetheart. What exactly happened? You never told me the details." Richard thought for a moment, deciding how much to reveal. Then he began to tell her carefully, without the darkest details, but with the essential truth, that he almost lost her because he was absent, that he learned that presence is the greatest gift we can give, and that from that day on he made a promise to never leave her alone again. Emily listened in silence, and when he finished, she got up, went to her father and hugged him tightly. "Thank you for coming back, Dad. Thank you for always being here." And Richard, with tears in his eyes, hugged his daughter back and whispered, "There's nowhere else in the world I'd rather be," because it was true, and it always would be. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Richard and Emily has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of redemption, transformation, and true love, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what resonated with you most in this story. What would you do if you were in Richard's shoes? How do you handle the balance between work and family? We want to hear your thoughts. Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, making us reflect on our own choices and inspiring us to be better versions of ourselves. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you think about what truly matters in life. Until then, take care of those you love, be present, and remember, the greatest success we can achieve is true love and real presence in the lives of those who matter. A big hug, and see you soon.